Hey YouTube, welcome back to our couch. It's been a while. My name is Elena,
And I'm Bjorn.
and we are Viking age reenactors and living historians here to talk with you about your favorite Viking shows.
If you don't know yet, we've been streaming Assassin's Creed Valhalla on our Twitch channel, link below. Recently, Ubisoft just released the new DLC, Wrath of the Druids, kind of a build-off on the game where you get to explore Ireland. They were kind enough to give us early access to the game, so in our roughly 6 or 8 hours of play, this is what we found out, and this is what you can expect from the DLC.
So the DLC expands us into 9th century Ireland, which is a place that's not really much talked about in TV shows or movies, at least not a ton that I've seen. So this gives us a whole slew of new talking points to really explore and get into, which is really, really interesting. So once you get and download the DLC, your story starts in Ravensthorpe. At the docks, you will find your first character, Azar, who is going to set you off on the quest to Ireland. And once you get to Ireland, Eivor is helping his cousin Barith, who is the king in Dublin, gain favor with the High King of Ireland, Flann Sheena. In the process of it, we get to explore Ireland, we get to learn a lot about the Druidic cults there, and also just kind of learn about the country as a whole as it existed in the 9th century.
Ireland, a patchwork of petty kings jostling for hills and pastures and green glens. My adopted isle.
So Ireland in the 9th century is broken up into many different realms with many different kings. Kind of the ruling classes was broken into family clans. If you were prosperous, you would, rule a segment and kind of have your own kingship. Despite there being many family clans kind of ruling different territories, there was one overarching clan that dominated Ireland, which was the Uineal. Originally started in the 5th century, by this time they were actually split into the northern and southern clans. They would often alternate who ruled as High King, so one elected in the north would rule until their death, and then once they died, the High King would be passed to the southern Uineal tribe, who would then rule until their death and then trade off continuously. For the time period that the game takes place in, Aed Finlaith, the former High King from the northern Uineal tribe, has died, and Flann Sheena is being sworn in as the new High King.
So a little bit here about Flann Sheena. He became king in 877 and then High King in 879 when the power passed down from the northern Uineal tribe down to the southern Uineal tribe. The big thing of note about his rule is that he did work very hard to unite Ireland and stop this traditional exchange of power between the south and the northern tribes. He basically wanted to create a single monarchy so that his children and their children would rule after him, and the power would never get passed back to the north. And he did so by using Viking mercenaries and also Viking Gaelic mercenaries to bolster his power in Ireland throughout his rule. We're not going to spoil for you exactly what happened, and we're pretty sure that the game is going to follow the way that the history went. So we will leave how that all went down until a later video.
Dublin is a Viking city, Eivor. But in fact, merchants and beggars come from all parts to parade in its muddy streets.
So this new DLC starts us off in the city of Dublin. At the time, Dublin was not the capital of Ireland, but it was a very important trade district for the area. Initially settled and founded by Viking settlers in the 840s, it later exchanged hands and local Gaels took control. So at this point in history, the Norse presence in Ireland was only really documented for around 100 years or so. There weren't many interactions between the Norse and the Gaelic communities at the time in the 8th century, but by this time in the 9th century, that had ramped up significantly, and Norse presence in Ireland was very commonplace. And they often played a very integral position in Irish politics and battle, and there was even an assimilated cultural exchange between the local Irish and the foreign Norse, known as the Norse Gaels or the Hiberno-Norse.
When the Christians came with sword and fire, some few Druids banded together. Eventually, they vowed to destroy the Christians. They turned to mayhem and murder. Many disguised themselves and live among the villagers.
So moving on from there, as the name of the DLC suggests, druids are part of this basically. And one of the first questions is, what was a druid back in the day? Druids were basically spiritual lawmakers before the coming of Christianity to Ireland. Of note, in the 9th century, Ireland was mostly Christianized already, so they weren't as prominent and active as they were in the earlier centuries. But a druid in Ireland would have been somebody that is a cross between a Gothi and a Volva. If you know a little bit more about Norse history than you do Irish history, there's a little bit of that crossover. They practiced magic and led religious rites, but they were also very heavily involved in politics and oftentimes were advisors to kings and were in their own rights lawmakers, the same way that Gothi would have been in Iceland.
It must be the poison used by a druid cult, the children of Danu.
Who are they?
Hand in hand with the Druids, there is also the mention of the children of Danu, or the Tuatha Dé Danann. Mythologically speaking, the Tuatha Dé Danann, the children of Danu, were one of 5 mythical races to inhabit Ireland. They kind of serve as an equivalent to the Nordic concept of the Aesir, being this divine race of beings. So in the game, the children of Danu are actually an extremist sect of druids that are working against the current powers currently controlling Ireland. At this time, their extremist actions have given the general concept of druids a bad name and forced the better ones underground, and so now they have this concept of just any druid being a very violent extremist religious cult. Interesting note here, despite being named after the mythical children of Danu, they actually seem to take on a personality and visage more similar to the other mythical race, Fomorians. Fomorians are another branch of this mythical race to inhabit Ireland. In the mythology, they take on many different appearances and personalities. They're often described as a seafaring people, sometimes deformed, sometimes with beast or animal heads, and they actually worked at a point to enslave the children of Danu and make them work for them before they were able to break themselves free in battle. Why are the children of Danu doing this? Get the DLC and find out. Or check out our stream and follow along in the story.
True druids oppose the Danu, but they are scattered and disorganized.
It is really interesting that the game has this sect of druids that are running around and making all of the druidic cults look like these evil monsters. Because historically, at least, the druids in Ireland kind of fell into the same pitfall as the Norse, where for the longest time they were described as these barbaric creatures. A lot has been written about them doing animal sacrifices and human sacrifices and spinning dark magics around them, and they were always kind of described as these like very barbaric creatures, when in reality it probably wasn't like that. Like the Vikings and the Norse in general, they happened to be a race of people back in the Dark Ages that didn't write a lot of stuff down, and a lot of the accounts of them that we read nowadays were written several centuries after they existed. The closest account that we have, and the only one that we believe might have possibly had contact with them, was actually Julius Caesar during the Roman invasions of Britain. And he's the only source that has written about them that could have possibly been in actual contact with them, and he does not describe them as these monsters that other authors have written about them in the later centuries.
I have waited for you these many centuries, Fjolnir.
I have come for your power.
Take it then.
So in addition to the main plot, there's also plenty of side adventures that you can go on. You can explore Ireland and get a beautiful view of the luscious green fields extending forever. There's new armor and content specific to Ireland itself, and there's also plenty of world events that you can experience and learn more about the mythology, including getting to experience the Morrigan.
In general, when it comes to historical accuracy in this game, we are still seeing a lot of very high historical accuracy when it comes to the different plot points and things that characters say in the game during the conversations. You will often hear a little bit about Ireland itself and what's going on with it and what's going on with certain kings, and a lot of that stuff is historically accurate, which is absolutely great to see. And also, there's historical inaccuracies going on, such as the clothing and the armoring. But as we've said before, a lot of that comes from the game designers wanting you to have really cool looking characters to play with and play against. It's just not something to take as historical accuracy when it comes to how people actually dressed in the Viking Age.
Yeah. Thankfully, there is a feature in the game currently where you can equip yourself with any style or level of armor, but then you can change the skin. We actually recently did the same thing. So we have some great Thor armaments and defenses, but it's all kitted out to look like your very basic thrall clothing, which is the most historically accurate stuff there, which is pretty excellent. I'm very happy about it.
If you want to see more and learn more about Irish history and folklore, feel free to join us on Twitch. We will be streaming the DLC until we're basically done with it. And we can't wait to jump into that and talk with you a little bit more on the DLC side, and also to continue questing through England and eventually to Vinland in the main game. Thank you guys so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit the like button. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you can be notified of our future videos, and we'll see you in the next one.